Well, this is a good time for me to go blah, 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 and say all sorts of crazy things just because, after all, I mean, how many other times would you have anybody do that for you? But, well, the blah, blah, blah really isn't that important. And as a matter of fact, today the news is not that important either. But I think that, well, I've got something else I'd like to tell you because this is true. I mean, it's an event that's very, very important. And I wonder if there's anything that can overcome the horrible, awful circumstance that follows here. Now, because this is what happened. See, the guy went in his car, he went to a drive-in store, or some kind of store anyway, and he purchased a sandwich. Yeah. Boy, was that a mistake. And particularly at this time of the year. See, he ordered a little meat sandwich. And the stuff of the sandwich, it was all placed inside a long, narrow bun. And so then he started down the street in his car. And well, anyway, I should tell you this really happened tomorrow night. Because tomorrow night's the big night. Anyway, so it was tomorrow night, and he thought he was all alone in the car, see, but he wasn't. No, he really wasn't alone in the car. Nope. He was driving slowly, see. And he reached over for the sandwich. And then it happened. That's right, it did happen. The bun, you see, was okay. But the little piece of meat inside, oh, was it terrible. Because there was only the skin. There was absolutely nothing inside the skin of the meat. The meat that was in the bun of the sandwich. Now, you ready? Keep in mind now that this happened tomorrow night, yes. See, there was little meat inside the bun, but it was terrible because there was only the skin there. There was nothing inside the skin of the meat that was in the sandwich bun. No meat inside what was to hold the meat. No. Do you realize this? In his car, inside the bun, you know what he had? Tomorrow night, you know what he had? He had a hollow wiener. Ho, ho, ho. A hollow... Oh, well, he ordered a wiener anyway, and it turned out to be hollow, see? Oh, you can have a little fun with stuff like that, can't you? Yes, I mean, I could have said it a little differently, too. There could have been some kind of a competition going on where all the guys and gals were out there, and they had a contest to see who could make the loudest shouting of all, see? Because, well, that would be appropriate for tomorrow night also, because if somebody made the loudest noise, he would then win first prize. He'd be a holler winner. No, we've got a hollow wiener and a holler winner. Hey, back to the hollow wiener for a moment. Do you think that sandwich scared everybody down the street? I mean, who would want to eat a hollow wiener? Well, anyway, the man in the car who'd gotten that and thought it was a nice hot dog turned out to be a hollow wiener. He didn't go back to the drive-in for another one. No. You know why? Well, it made a lot of noise, and the noise of one hollow wiener is loud enough. Have a good Halloween next evening. Bye-bye. See you next week. Well, I won't see you, but I'll talk to you next week if I get done eating the hollow wiener by then. Well, he seemed ideally suited for the job. He had wild hair, tight pants with glow-in-the-dark finish, and a nasal voice, good loud scream, intensity. But very little awareness of good English skills. You have everything, I told him with some enthusiasm, since you don't seem much interested in continuing with ordinary academics. Give it a try. You really meant it? Sure, you're as far from academics as the Rolling Stones. Why not become a rock star yourself? Now, he said the Stones could never be duplicated, and I wondered, of course, why anybody would want to try it. Oh, they're just too good, he said. Well, I said all they have that the others don't have is a name. Well, what can I do about that? Well, I figured it was time to share my professional wisdom. I said, son, every rock group looks for some image, but they're all the same. Their dumb names have run the full course. We have the Grumps, we have a group called the Cruds, the Foo-Poos, the Grateful Dead, the Unhappy Alive, the Scums, the Dorians. Every full name, I think, has probably been used, but there's one angle that hasn't been explored enough. I think it would make anybody a star overnight, and now then this young man was interested, of course. He wanted to be a rock star, see? And how many rock stars can get advice in their careers from an old fuddy-duddy old English prof? See, that's what I was for many, many years. And I said to him, what the world needs is a merger of academics and rock. Wouldn't that be great to have the whoopie-doo singers, but combining academics with that? And why not teach good English, I said to him. Teach good English while you're doing your thing on the stage. I said, look, how about starting up a musical group called the Pronouns? Oh, that would be good, wouldn't it? You learned back in grade school what pronouns can do, I'm sure. And I said to him, then you can come out with a great hit tune, like what could be titled, I'm Taking Somebody's Place. Or how about, well, I do think anyway, when you screech, I think it'll teach. Well, the young man continued to stare at me. I said, how about a group called the Participles? That'd be a good name for a rock group, but the Participles. You could have an album that would be titled Dangling. The young man had to admit this had considerable merit, though. I said, how about a musical group called the Sentence Fragments? Yes. And they could have a new song out, and it could be titled, Without You, I Have No Verb at All. Oh, and then he said to me, do you think we could pack them in the Coliseum or in the theater with those names? I assured him that everybody was interested in learning good language usage. Yeah, that's true. And let's see, what could we call Well, you could even have a group that would be called the Exclamation Point. Yes, that would work out real well. Everybody'd want to go and see what brought it on. Well, the young man was exuberant. He said, I think this is great. I'm going to try to go through the names. But then after a pause, he says, I can't think of any more grammar terms. I don't know anymore. So I went to for the heart of our conversation. I said, well, you might try coming to class once in a while. We talk about that stuff all the time. Yeah, this was way back when I was one of those classroom professors. And he said, you really talk about that kind of stuff? Well, sometimes a professor wonders why he stays in the business, I'm sure. I assured the young man that just a week before all of this happened, we had a session on double negatives. Because that's something we need to know if we're writing. We got to avoid double negatives. But he knew it. He said right away, he said, I got it. A rock group would be called No. That would be a good name for him. Well, and I said, you want any more ideas? And then he said, I'm going to come to your class tomorrow for sure. Well, that's good. I said, wear your glow-in-the-dark pants and keep the strut, and I'll call on you to recite. But I must tell you that we're scheduled to write a paper in class. And he said, to write a paper? You mean I've got to write the whole... how can I tie that in with an academic rock group? Yes. Well, I said, just think of it as whatever you come up with as your theme song. Because you were writing a theme in the class. Yes. Enough of that. Yeah. Years and years ago, this old prof was at Mount Union College teaching, and I don't know that anything happened exactly like this, but I had fun thinking about possibilities of that nature. Back with you next week. You know, I think about all of the restaurants that are here in Alliance, and you get all different themes of them, too. I know that a friend reported one time to me that there were more than 24 of them along the street. And you could spend a month, you see, just kind of trying out all of them. That would be good to do, I'm sure. But what about Mexican food? I've thought about that ever since we've had that fine Mexican-American restaurant. That was many years ago that it started, of course. And I think about, when I think about Mexico, I also think about Texas. You see, I was introduced to the world of chalupas and enchiladas and the rest. It was quite a harrowing experience. But I share it now so that all others who may venture to one of the eateries featuring Mexican menus that you'll be prepared. Should it be your first such outing, of course. Once you've gone a number of times, it's a totally different matter. But I remember way back when, it wasn't here in Alliance, I was elsewhere at that particular time. I studied the menu carefully, tried to pronounce some of the names. I smiled when the dark-haired waitress who waited eagerly for the order was right there, and I had the benefit of hosts who were explaining what each of the items was. They urged me to try pinto beans. Well, I was smart, though. I knew that a pinto is a small horse, and the beans of a horse did not appeal to me. Yes. So I settled for a safe tostada and a chalupa for the first course. A chalupa, I figured, was a dance with the waitress. A chalupa-doopa-doopa. Well, the menu got more harrowing, however. The host said, "You'll love eating a burrito." I said, "Just a darn minute here now." My dander was really up. "You're talking about a person who is an 80% vegetarian." So they asked, and I said, "So you asked me to eat donkey meat. You said I would eat a burrito." Well, they were patient. The burrito, it turned out, was not from a burro, but rather from simply ground meat. I remember a classic novel that Steinbeck wrote many years ago, a wonderful novel. Wasn't a tasty one, though, as far as I was concerned. The title was Tortilla Flat. No, I don't really recall it was anything about donkey meat, though, but still it was. Well, anyway, my friends remained patient. They switched. They said, "Try the hot peppers." Well, I've heard of those. Are they as hot as I've really been told? And my friend said, "Oh, they're good for you. You aren't scared now, are you?" They were snickering now. And I put on my most confident air. I said, "Who, me?" I dangled then one of these hot peppers in front of my mouth, and then I put the whole thing in my mouth, the whole pepper. And I bit into it, and it was a good solid bite. I think the fire department was there within minutes. By then, the waitress was shouting unmentionable Mexican phrases, and my hosts were rolling on the floor laughing. After the fire department left, my friend suggested a chilibiano. I said, "Is it cold?" They said quite the opposite. Then I was not interested. You see, I had learned something. Well, that was many years ago. Today, I love Mexican food. Oh, yes. And I look forward to each time that I go. And it's really good, the Mexican food. Well, especially once you get over the idea that you're munching donkey meat. Back with you next week. Some years ago, I was leading a seminar in creative writing for high school teachers down in North Carolina. And I made reference to a novel by Glenway Westcott that was titled The Pilgrim Hawk. And I was using the story to make a point about symbolism in literature. The novel is of a broken marriage, of a man and wife in their middle years finding little in common with each other, and in the course of the story the wife takes up the sport of falconry and frequently appears with a hawk on a leash, a trained bird, sitting on her arm. Well, inasmuch as the novel dealt with the superiority of the woman over the man, her dominance of the marriage, I pointed out that the hawk could be thought of in a real sense as a symbol of the husband. He was manacled to her arm. He was trained to do her bidding. Well, for whatever significance that may be, the teachers there in that seminar began to grin and chuckle as I told the story of a woman with a hawk on her arm. And I was uneasy, and I assumed that this seminar, about 80% of the ones participating were women, that they were snickering at the chauvinistic illustration I had selected. Anyway, at a little break in the day-long seminar, I asked one of them about this dire possibility, and she said, "No, that's not it." I said, "Well, if that's not it, then what prompted all your grins and all your chuckles?" They said, "It was your pronunciation, Professor Crist. You kept speaking of the woman with a hawk on her arm." "Yes." "And you pronounced it hawk. But down here, the bird we pronounced hawk. But you pronounced it hawk. Now, the only hawk or hawk we have in North Carolina is a ham hawk." Yeah. We're all picturing our minds with this strange woman going around with a ham hawk chained to her arm. Well, I learned something about dialect that day. You see, dialect is defined as the regional variety of language, characterized by pronunciation or by grammar. It's one of the many facets of language that fascinates, I think. Our language is a common denominator among all of us. The awareness of regional pronunciations, of regional meanings, as well as cultural and ethnic speech patterns, I think that can benefit all of us. Yeah. A poke in Ohio is a jab. In the South, it's a paper sack. The examples are endless. Language changes also. New words are added and others become archaic. There are people who make the study of words their professions, and one is a gentleman named Thomas Middleton. And to get a good perspective on language, well, I enjoyed reading a book called Light Refractions. It's Thomas Middleton's book, published by Verbatim Press in Essex, Connecticut. Well, anyway, you don't have to be a logophile to appreciate the book, and not a logomaniac. But you'll enjoy it if you're a user of words, and who isn't? You see, Middleton ranges in topics from origins of ain't, yes, that's a valuable word, isn't it, even if it is illiterate, to the former, it was President Ford here in the United States. He used football jargon in governmental matters. Yeah. And different ways of knowing the words and how to not only pronounce, but how to use them. Dialect and regionalisms are also a big factor in this. Well, it's helpful to know word meanings and variations due to the region and due to the background. Well, and I'm thinking now, maybe you might have the problem several of my students had in New York City some time ago. Yeah, it was a long time ago because I retired from Mount Union some many years ago, but I'm thinking of that. One of my classes, they were in New York City, and in a small restaurant they ordered sodas, expecting the usual ice cream and fizz combination that we call a soda. In Ohio, we do that. Well, these students were astonished when each received precisely what was ordered. In New York, a glass full of soda water. Well, surprise was the word to describe my students' reactions, and that's the right word, though, isn't it? Surprise, both in Ohio and in New York. Yes. So it can be many, many ways for all of us. Well, just remember that words can go in all sorts of different directions. I'm thinking further of the word logomaniac. It's defined as one who is insanely interested in words. Well, this old retired English prof better not, he might be interested, but he better not let it become insanely interested in words. I do not have the mind to go quite that far, I hope at least. Back with you next week.
Here, on. Can you say 1, 2, 3?
Huh? Well, this time of year, we may have a little snow on occasion. First snowfall is usually it's one of major things that come to our mind. Anticipation of the days ahead and heavy snows or reflections on events of the past, one or the other. Now, those of us in years beyond our teens, well, we can go in either direction. More often than not, I think it's It's the latter of these two courses we pursue in our mental excursions. And what happens in such reflections is not always a pure 100% absolute truth, because memory tends to clog thought on occasion. Well, it's not an evil circumstance. It does need to be recognized. Now, John Greenleaf Whittier, the excellent writer, was reflecting when he wrote his classic poem, Snowbound. Perhaps you've read it in school. It's a rather long series of iambic tetrameters. Hoo, 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 hoo. See, I'm being technical there. Anyway, but they tell of the week-long period in which he and his family were forced to stay at their New England farmhouse because of a heavy snowfall. Well, Whittier wrote the poem in his later days when all members of his family were deceased except one sister. Looking back, he relived that week, and he came up with a few lines suggesting the span of time has mellowed some thoughts. For instance, when the snowstorm finally stopped, the farm blocked on all sides, Whittier is told by his father to get a shovel and dig a path to the barn. Whittier at that time was maybe 10 years old, and from the poem we read that his father merely ordered him with these words, "Boys, a path." And according to the poem, Whittier was very well pleased. Nothing that would Well, he couldn't have much when a farmer boy counted much more than a summons like this, anything less than joy. Well, anyway, I wonder if at the time it might have been just a little less than pure joy for the boy. But you see, the years go by, and he looks back. His father's there, boys, a path. And so, in later years, maybe he recalled only the events and the present-day sentiment blended with him. Well, in a poem titled Men at 40, Donald Justice brings out the same point. He speaks at that time of life, but he uses the imagery of rooms when speaking of our use of memories, noting that such men at 40 learn to close softly the doors to the rooms they will not be coming back to. Close them softly. Don't disturb our memories. Don't jar them with unwanted aspects of those days so we can never again experience them. Well, I sincerely trust you have your own happy recollection of December's past, and I hope you have many happy ones. And I trust that you will not object too strongly when the poet in all of us, we might say, begins to round the corners off just a little bit. We're just closing the doors softly. Back with you next week. I'm thinking now of a good book for the Christmas season. You know, writing is a matter of being specific, and many times in vague generalities, sometimes, well, they may be all right for emotional political speeches or some sentimental poetry, but it's not the best way to express. And we remember, for instance, the parables in the Bible because they are specific accounts or stories. Yep. And that's why we remember certain incidents in our past and how we remember them specifically. Well, I remember some years back, several weeks before Christmas, came a note in a small paperback from a former student of mine at Mount Union College. It said, "This book has gone through the children's department like a bull in a china shop." And so, very thoughtfully, she thought that our family might enjoy it. The title was The Best Christmas Pageant Ever, the author Barbara Robinson, and I'm sure many of you know of that book. Been around for a long time. Because, for example, look at the specifics here. The Herdman family, that's the name of it. The Herdmans were absolutely the worst kids in the history of the world. They lied and stole and smoked cigars, even the girls, and talked dirty and hit little kids and cussed their teachers and took the name of the Lord in vain and set fire to Fred Shoemaker's old broken-down tool house. Wow. That's sufficient, specific summary of horrible ones, isn't it? Well, the book is about 80 pages. It recounts the continuing nastiness of some of the characters, some of the kids in the family, just before the Christmas season, and they became part of the Christmas pageant in the church, and the pageant would never be the same again. Nope, because of the people participating. Well, in the book, specifics abound throughout. Told from the point of view of another grade schooler, the story affords many specifics with which readers of all ages can identify. And the book's style and its message, oh yes, there is a message, And it's a better one than a vague Santa Claus. You've got to be the specifics. Anyway, suppose the story had begun this way. In our town, there's a family with kids which is not too well liked because of all sorts of things they do. Isn't that exciting? Isn't that I mean, oh, no, it isn't. There's nothing specific to it, is there? No. Got to have something that gets... Remember now, the heading of the opening of this story really was, the Herdmans were absolutely the worst kids in the history of the world. They lied and stole and smoked cigars and talked dirty and hit little kids. Well, I read that to you before. But the whole point is that I can remember talking to an editor of the American magazine some years ago, and he said about selling fiction to him, get me to read it. Make my stomach juices flow in the first 40 words. That's what the editor said to me. Well, anyway, we got to get their interest quickly. Well, if you haven't read The Herdmans, about the Herdmans, get that little book called The Best Christmas Pageant Ever. It has the specifics. And so I've given you my specific recommendation for it. Back with you next week.